The girl's stomach twisted. No plates. Captain Harris exhaled slowly. Whoever they are, they don't want to be identified. Before she could say anything else, the SUV's driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, dressed in dark clothing. He didn't move like a carjacker or a random threat. He moved with purpose, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't pull a weapon, didn't shout any threats. He just stood there, staring straight at them. Captain Harris didn't hesitate. She unbuckled her seatbelt, hand instinctively moving to her holster. "Stay in the car," she ordered. The girl's breath quickened. "Mom, no. Stay here." Then she stepped out, leaving the girl alone in the car, watching in silent terror as her mother walked toward the unknown man. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man smirked. "Didn't take you long to figure out something was off, did it?" Captain Harris didn't react. "Who are you?" "You already know," he said. "Or at least you know who I work for." The girl felt a chill crawl up her spine. Her mother's jaw tightened. "You set this up." The man shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Not me. I just follow orders. You, though, you made things messy. Calling your people, asking too many questions." He let out a low chuckle. "You weren't supposed to show up tonight." Captain Harris squared her shoulders. "And my daughter? Was she not supposed to show up either?" The man's smirk faded. "She was a message." The girl's breath hitched. A message? For her mother? Captain Harris' hand hovered near her holster, but she didn't reach for it. "You tell whoever sent you that I got the message loud and clear." The man tilted his head. "And what are you going to do about it, Captain?" Then sirens. Flashing lights. The man exhaled, looking over his shoulder as police cruisers turned onto the street, speeding toward them. "Guess that's my cue." Without another word, he stepped back into the SUV. The girl wanted to scream. "Mom, stop him." But her mother didn't move. She just watched, jaw clenched, as the SUV peeled off into the night, disappearing before the officers could block it in. The girl turned to her mother. "Why did you let him go?" Captain Harris finally looked at her, and for the first time all night, there was something in her eyes the girl didn't recognize. "He was never the one in charge," she said quietly. The girl shivered. If that man was just a messenger, then who was really pulling the strings? The flashing lights bathed the street in red and blue as officers poured onto the scene. The teenage girl sat frozen in the passenger seat, her pulse still racing from what had just happened. Her mother stood beside the car, arms crossed, watching as the officers spread out, too late to stop the SUV from disappearing into the night. An officer approached Captain Harris, his face tight with concern. "Captain, are you all right?" She nodded, but there was a weight in her expression, something unsettled. "I'm fine, but I need every traffic camera in this area pulled now." That SUV had no plates. Whoever they are, they planned this. The officer nodded and rushed off to relay the orders. The girl finally found her voice. "Mom, what happens now?" Captain Harris sighed, running a hand over her face. "Now." She glanced down the street where the SUV had vanished. "Now, I find out who sent that man and why they wanted to send me a message through you." The girl shuddered. She had never seen her mother shaken before. Not like this. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something deeper. A realization that this wasn't just about a mistaken arrest anymore. This was bigger, more dangerous. Another officer walked over. "Captain, we checked with dispatch. There's still no record of any call about your daughter or a suspect in this area." He hesitated. "And there's something else." The officers who detained her, their body cams were deactivated. The girl's stomach dropped. Captain Harris' face remained unreadable, but her jaw tightened. Of course they were. The officer looked uneasy. "Do you think this was internal?" Captain Harris didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned and looked at her daughter. "Go home," she said softly. The girl blinked. "What?" "Go home," her mother repeated. "I'll deal with this." The girl shook her head. "Mom, I don't want to leave you here alone." Captain Harris studied him, searching for the full truth in his face. The girl could see her mother calculating, thinking, trying to piece together what this really meant. Then, before anyone could say another word, a voice crackled over the radio in Davis' patrol car. "We got a call about a disturbance near Oakwood and 5th. Possible connection to the earlier suspect description." The girl felt her pulse quicken. Oakwood and 5th. That was close to where she had been walking earlier. Her mother's face darkened. Davis exchanged a look with his partner. "That's the same area." Captain Harris didn't wait. She turned to her daughter. "Get in the car." The girl hesitated, her mind racing. "Mom, what's happening?" Her mother didn't answer right away, but there was something in her eyes, something sharp, protective, and more serious than before. "Someone's trying to set this up," she finally said, "and I need to find out who." The girl's heart pounded as she slid into the car, the weight of everything settling onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about what had happened tonight. This was bigger. And whoever was behind it wasn't finished yet. The car ride was silent, but the air between them was anything but calm. The teenage girl sat in the passenger seat, gripping her phone tightly, her mind racing. Her mother's hands were firm on the wheel, her eyes locked onto the road ahead, her expression unreadable. She had seen her mother serious before. She was a police captain after all, but this was different. This wasn't just about her getting stopped. This was something bigger, something deliberate. As they neared Oakwood and 5th, Captain Harris slowed the car, scanning the area. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. A few cars parked along the curb, the glow of a street lamp flickering over the sidewalk, but something felt off. The girl could sense it too. Then, out of nowhere, the radio in her mother's car crackled to life. "Suspects spotted near Oakwood, heading toward the intersection now." Her mother grabbed the radio. "Who has eyes on them?" Silence. The girl looked at her mother. "Mom, that's not normal, is it?" Captain Harris didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her phone, dialing a number with quick, steady fingers. It rang twice before someone picked up. "This is Captain Harris. Who made the original call about the suspect in this area?" A pause. Then a voice on the other end, hesitant. Captain, was still trying to verify that information. Her mother's grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean, verify? Either we got a call or we didn't." Another pause. "Ma'am, there's no record of a call." The teenage girl felt a chill rush down her spine. No record. Then where had the officer's orders come from? Her mother's expression darkened, her jaw tightening. "Then who gave my officers orders to detain my daughter?" Static crackled over the line. The voice on the other end hesitated again. "We don't know." Her mother hung up, her breath slow and controlled, but the girl could see the tension in her shoulders. This wasn't just a bad call. Someone had sent those officers after her, and they had done it without leaving a trail. The girl looked out the window, scanning the darkened streets. "Mom, if no one called it in, then whoa." Then she saw it. A black SUV parked a little too perfectly at the corner, just out of view from the main road. Tinted windows, no lights on, but the feeling in her gut told her it was watching them. Her mother must have sensed it too, because she suddenly cut the engine, letting the car sit quietly in the shadows. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. The girl's heart pounded as she whispered, "What if this isn't about me? What if it's about you?" Her mother's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, something that made the girl realize she had just spoken a truth neither of them wanted to admit. Then, before they could move, the SUV's headlights flashed on, and it started driving straight toward them. The SUV sped toward them, its headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The teenage girl's breath caught in her throat. Her mother's fingers gripped the wheel, her body tense but steady. She wasn't panicking. She was calculating. Then, just as the SUV got dangerously close, Captain Harris threw the car into reverse. her tires screeching as she backed up fast. The SUV swerved at the last second, barely missing them before speeding past. But it didn't keep going. It slammed to a stop up ahead, the brake lights glowing red in the night. "Mom," the girl whispered, her heart pounding. "Who are they?" Her mother didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed the radio again. "This is Captain Harris. I need units at Oakwood and 5th now. Unmarked black SUV, possible threat, no plates." A voice crackled through. "Units en route." The flashing red and blue lights painted the dark street as sirens blared through the quiet neighborhood. A teenage girl, no older than 16, stood frozen on the sidewalk, her hands shaking as 2 officers loomed over her. She had done nothing wrong, just walking home from a friend's house, but now she was being treated like a criminal. "Where are you coming from?" One officer barked, his voice thick with suspicion. "I just told you. My friend's house. I live 2 blocks away," she answered, her voice calm but firm. The officers exchanged glances. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," the second officer said, stepping closer. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Her heart pounded. "For what? I didn't do anything," she protested, panic creeping into her voice. Before she could say another word, cold metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. A wave of fear crashed over her, fear that so many others have felt in moments like this. She knew better than to fight back, but she also knew this wasn't right. As they led her toward the police car, her mind raced. Should she tell them? Should she say who her mother was? Would they even care? But before she could decide, the radio on one officer's shoulder crackled. "Captain Harris is on her way to the scene," the voice announced. Her breath caught in her throat. That was her mother. The officers hesitated for just a second, but it was long enough for the girl to see the sudden shift in their eyes. They had no idea. And now it was too late. The sound of an approaching car cut through the night, its headlights illuminating the scene. The back door swung open, and out stepped a woman in full uniform, her presence commanding. The officers stiffened as she approached. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her sharp gaze landing on her daughter in handcuffs. The girl had never been so relieved and so nervous at the same time. She knew her mother wouldn't let this slide. But the question was, what would happen next? The officers stiffened the moment they saw her. Captain Harris moved with the kind of authority that made people step back without her having to say a word. Her uniform was crisp, her expression unreadable, but the fire in her eyes was impossible to miss. Her daughter stood there, wrists still cuffed, her face tense, but holding back the emotions threatening to spill over. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the situation pressed down on the night air like a storm about to break. "What's going on here?" Captain Harris repeated, her voice sharper this time. The 2 officers, who had been so confident just moments before, suddenly looked unsure. The older one, the one who had done most of the talking, cleared his throat. We were just questioning her, Captain," he said, his tone careful now. "She matched the description of." Captain Harris cut him off with a look. "Of who? Be specific." The officer hesitated. "A suspect in a recent theft," he finally said. "A theft," she repeated, her voice calm but firm. "And what exactly made you think she was involved?" The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. "Like I said, she matched the description we received." Captain Harris crossed her arms. "And what was that description?" Silence. The 2 officers avoided her gaze, as if suddenly realizing there was no real answer they could give without making things worse for themselves. The teenage girl watched them, her heart still racing, but now there was something else mixed in with the fear, something that felt a lot like anger. Her mother turned to her. "Did they tell you why they were stopping you?" She shook her head. "No, they just said I fit the description. I was walking home, Mom. That's it." Captain Harris took a slow breath, her jaw tightening. "Take the cuffs off," she ordered. The older officer hesitated for just a second too long. "Now." That got them moving. The younger officer fumbled for the key, his hands suddenly clumsy as he unlocked the cuffs. The moment they clicked open, the girl rubbed her wrists, still feeling the cold sting of metal even though they were gone. Captain Harris didn't look away from the officers. "You didn't call this in before placing her in cuffs." We're going to." "You didn't," she corrected, "because if you had, you would have known exactly who she was. You would have known she's my daughter." The officers looked like they wanted to disappear. "Tell me," she continued, her voice dangerously calm, "what were you planning to do after you put her in the back of your car?" Neither of them answered. The girl watched them shift uncomfortably under her mother's gaze. Part of her wanted them to speak, just to see how deep they were willing to dig themselves into this mess. But another part of her didn't need to hear it. She already knew the truth. This wasn't about a theft. This was about something else. And now, they knew they had messed with the wrong girl. But what would her mother do next? The night air felt heavy, thick with tension that neither officer could escape. Captain Harris didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene, but the silence that followed her question was worse than any shouting match. The officers, who had moments ago been so sure of their actions, now stood like schoolboys caught in the act. Her daughter watched them, arms crossed over her chest. The cuffs were off, but the marks they left on her wrists still burned. She had been scared before, but now that fear had turned into something else, something sharper, something that wouldn't fade so easily. Captain Harris finally broke the silence. "Let me ask you one more thing," she said, her voice steady. "Would you have treated her the same way if you knew she was my daughter from the start?" The older officer swallowed hard. "Captain, we were just." "Answer the question." Neither of them did. And that was answer enough. A car slowed down at the corner, headlights sweeping over them. A couple of people had stopped on the other side of the street, pretending not to watch, but the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about one girl being wrongly detained. It was about something bigger, something that had been happening for far too long. The younger officer finally found his voice. "We weren't trying to." Captain Harris turned to him. "Don't finish that sentence." He clamped his mouth shut. The teenage girl glanced at her mother. She could see the battle going on beneath the surface, the need to remain professional, to handle this the right way, while also wanting to protect her daughter from a system she knew too well. "Do you know how many times she's been stopped like this?" Captain Harris asked, directing her words at the older officer now. "Do you have any idea what it's like to raise a child who has to be twice as careful, twice as aware, just to get home safely?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "We were just following procedure, Captain." "Procedure," she repeated, letting the words sit between them. "Tell me, Officer Davis, where in your procedure does it say to cuff a teenager without cause?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. The teenage girl looked between them. She had seen her mother in uniform before, but never like this, never standing between her and the people who were supposed to serve and protect. It felt strange, watching them scramble under the weight of her mother's authority, knowing that if this had been anyone else's child, things might have ended very differently. "Mom," she finally said, her voice quiet but steady, "let's just go." Captain Harris exhaled slowly, then turned back to the officers. "This isn't over." She took her daughter's hand, guiding her toward their car. But as they walked away, the girl couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. As Captain Harris led her daughter away, the officers stood frozen, exchanging uneasy glances. The tension lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. But even as they reached their car, the teenage girl could feel something wasn't right. The night wasn't over. This wasn't over. Her mother opened the car door for her, but before she could step inside, a voice called out behind them. "Captain Harris, wait." It was the older officer, Davis. His tone was different now, less defensive, more hesitant. The girl turned back, watching as he took a step forward, his expression unreadable. His partner, the younger officer, stood still, jaw clenched, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. Captain Harris didn't move. She studied Davis, her face giving away nothing. What is it? He hesitated again, glancing at his partner before lowering his voice. We weren't the ones who put out the description. The girl frowned. Then who did? Davis shifted uncomfortably. The call came in earlier today. We were just given orders to be on the lookout. The description we got was vague, but... He glanced at the girl, guilt flickering across his face. We assumed. Captain Harris' jaw tightened. You assumed, she repeated, the words sharp enough to cut. Davis swallowed hard. Captain, I'm just saying. Something about this call felt off. Dispatch didn't have details. No report, no official statement, just a call telling us to check it out. The girl's stomach twisted. That meant someone had called them specifically. Someone had pointed her out. But why? Captain Harris caught onto it too. You're saying there was no actual suspect. Davis hesitated but finally nodded, not officially. The younger officer, clearly uncomfortable, tugged at his belt. Davis, don't. But Davis ignored him. Something's not right here, Captain. I thought you should know. Captain Harris gave her a small, tired smile. You're not leaving me. I'm making sure you're safe. The girl wanted to argue, but the look in her mother's eyes told her it wasn't up for discussion. A few minutes later, she was in the back of a squad car, one of her mother's trusted officers driving her home. She stared out the window, her mind spinning. The man in the SUV, the officers with their deactivated cameras, the mysterious missing call, none of it made sense. But one thing was clear. Someone had wanted to send a message, and her mother had gotten it. As the car pulled into their driveway, she exhaled slowly. Maybe this was over for her, but not for her mother. Captain Harris wasn't the type to let things go. And whoever was behind this, they had just made a mistake. Because now they had her full attention.